Hello, and welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report powered by CaliberMind. Our goal on the RMR is to help marketers move from subject matter experts to strategic business partners. I'm your host, Camela Thompson, and today I'm thrilled to introduce Peter Zaballos. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks for having me on. This is going to be super fun.
Do you want to give us a little bit of your background?
I spent my whole career in high growth technology companies, either helping to run them, and also spent 7 years with three other partners running what turned out to be a pretty successful venture capital firm. And we funded high growth tech companies there. And my last two roles, I was chief marketing officer. I spent 6 years at SPS Commerce, which is a public company in Minneapolis that has a cloud-based supply chain platform for retailing, and was CMO there, and then relocated from the Midwest to Seattle and was the CMO at Cumulo, which is a super successful storage technology company that recently achieved unicorn status. And that was super fun because, we had a technology that could really transform a whole segment of computing, and bringing that to market was pretty exciting.
That's also where you and I met. And
Yes.
I'm so excited to have you on here because I've always felt like you have a really unique perspective about how sales and marketing should be aligned. So without spoiling anything, let's start with marketing's true north. If there's one metric to follow, what should it be?
The only metric that matters, are we hitting the sales plan? And I would say that that's everybody's job in any company, regardless of what department you're in. But in marketing, it absolutely is whether or not we're hitting the revenue plan. And if not, why?
Now, it's really interesting. I was talking to a sales friend and mentioned something you had said, and it just floored him, and it made me kind of sad. So the thing you said was marketing can't consider itself done or achieving a goal if sales hasn't hit theirs.
Yeah, and that is a surprisingly difficult level of organizational cooperation to get to. And frankly, it's the exception and it's not the norm. It's funny, the very first breakout tech company I worked at was a company called LSI Logic. It was a semiconductor company in Silicon Valley. We created the whole technology that basically makes cell phones and computers and everything possible now. And that company had just a phenomenal culture. Sales and marketing were just the same. I was the head of marketing for Northern California. I just lived with the salespeople, and we were all just working together. And we had no CRM, we had no data. It was early days. And it seems like the more data and more technology we've injected into sales and marketing, the easier it's become for them to operate as individual silos. If marketing's role is reduced to delivering leads, and that's where their field of vision ends, then I think the real opportunity of the business is completely compromised. If marketing's role is to develop a deep understanding of what are the words that prospect is typing into Google at 3:00 in the morning because they got this problem that's keeping them up at night, and knowing that those words have nothing to do with the product you're going to eventually sell them, having them develop that deep understanding of that buyer's journey and having that journey end when you hand a lead off to a BDR, boy, you're just leaving so much potential on the ground. I also think it's the rare and evolved head of marketing and head of sales who can look at each other and understand that the marketing person needs to have visibility and influence on everything that happens all the way up to the completed sale. And the sales leader has to also share that same interest and influence about everything that happens prior to that lead getting into a salesperson's hand. If you achieve that, then the good news is with all the technology and data we've got, you can really make some pretty transformative impacts on the business.
Wow. There's kind of a lot to unpack there, and I'd love to start with the technology piece because as a technologist, my view of it has always been its purpose is to make life easier. But the reality is it's very easy to over-engineer and complicate things and stop talking to the people that are actually using the system. It just interests me that you're saying with the increase of technology, the silos seem to be more divisive. Do you think that has anything to do with how much marketers have had to specialize in all of these different tools? And the mechanisms we're expecting people to perform today. That handoff is that the issue? The handoff? Like, where do you? It's a big question, and I'm not stating it very well.
No, but you're going at the right issue, which is, I think with all this technology, a sales leader and a marketing leader can create their own set of metrics that tell the truth that they see in their silo. And instead of it uniting the two groups, it can create a lot of friction because the marketing person can show up and say, hey, I delivered all the MQLs I was supposed to deliver, and my job is done. And here are all the metrics that can document that. And the salesperson can say, of those MQLs, a majority of them weren't relevant. And here's all my data saying that. It almost makes it, from a technology perspective, it makes it almost too easy to live in your own world. So many of the marketing tools are for marketers. Marketing operations didn't exist 10 years ago. Sales operations did. But then with marketing people getting more and more tools suited to just what they do, and in a lot of cases, not having great integration and visibility into the CRM that the sales force is using, it makes it too easy to get into a fight about data. Mm-hmm. And, which is why the question you asked at the beginning, like the only real way around that is to say, okay, everybody gets measured on, did we hit the revenue plan?
Yeah, 100%. It brought to mind in the past, seeing people measured on MQLs and using that as a threshold, the chaos that can create. And a thing I hear a lot of marketers say is that sales doesn't follow up on leads. And I think what that perspective is neglecting to look at is that perhaps their definition of a lead isn't in alignment with what sales needs to do their job.
Yeah, totally. And I think a frequent breakdown, just the totally different nature of the work. So much of what marketing does is clinical and never actually interacts with a human. You're working on content strategies that are optimized around search performance and conversion rates for hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of opportunities. And the salesperson is trying to talk to a human. And getting that deal closed is all about human interaction. So it right there's this natural impedance mismatch between what's the marketing team up to, and then it's going to take a lot of work for that marketing team to spend the time with the sales force to understand what are the materials they actually need to move a sale through all those stages. And it's going to be hard to get objective data. Like you can't put a meter on the salesperson while they're talking to this customer and measure anything, which is why I do think for this to work well, the marketing person has to take the obligation on of understanding what is the life like for the salesperson closing that deal, and how can you craft marketing components that help them once they've got the lead and they're working it. But at the same time, the salesperson has to take on the obligation of understanding what is the marketing team doing to get that lead to them, because the conversion rate of that handoff matters a ton, and it's a shared conversion rate that frequently the marketing team washes its hands and says, I gave you all those leads. And the sales team says, but most of them sucked. And instead of getting together to figure out why, they sort of get into their trenches and it gets stuck. And then once that happens, you just get a very awful dynamic between sales and marketing.
We've all seen it, or a lot of us have seen it. So before we dig into conversion rates, because it's a topic I love and is close to me. So I was thinking about what you said about providing sales with the assets they need to move the sales along. And that sounds pretty close to sales enablement. Do you feel that it's in the company's best interest for marketing to step in and perform a bit of that sales enablement function?
Yeah, the way I would answer that, Camela, is to say there's an obligation that has to be respected. And it doesn't matter who it reports to, but if marketing doesn't feel an obligation to do what they can to help with sales enablement, regardless of where it reports to, then that's the first big missed opportunity. At least now there's this function called sales enablement.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of tools emerging to help you measure it and promote it. But, I think there's an obligation on the part of marketing to do what they can to make sales enablement as efficient as possible.
That's so well said. And then the other thing that I took from sales feedback, I kind of heard, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but that human bias comes into play when you're dealing one-on-one, individual to individual with sales. Although I feel that they have a lot of great feedback. They can tell us right away if a message is or isn't resonating. The really positive and really negative transactions are the ones that stick in our brain. And the negative ones, brain science, we're just hardwired to remember the negative over the positive. Do you think we can get past that?
So the hard part about how do you keep a constructive relationship with sales through good and bad experiences, I think a big part of that is, unfortunately, the salesperson's income is tied to that sale in a way the marketing person's isn't. And understandably, a sales rep is going to get pretty upset if a deal doesn't happen for whatever reason, because that was income that was just taken away from them. And the marketing person can look at it like, well, that was a learning moment. What data did we take away to do better the next time? So to me, it's about leadership. That's why the head of sales, the head of marketing have got to be just fused together leadership wise, because I think that's when the head of sales needs to be able to provide the leadership to their team to say, we may have lost a deal here. What are we learning from it? How can we work better together so that we don't lose it the next time? If you lack that leadership on the sales side, the marketing people can do all they want, but they're going to be one hand clapping. And it's hard. I totally empathize with salespeople. That's just a really hard job. And it's hard when it doesn't work out and you've put months or years into getting that deal to happen and you lose it. But in the end, I think it's all about leadership on both sides.
Wow. I'm thinking back to early in my career, my manager, understandably, sales management is extremely protective of their people. And my manager negotiated ride-alongs so that we actually would go with them and see what took place. And that just built so much understanding and empathy that I've carried with me throughout my career. I just feel like if we could do more of that and see each other as people who have livelihoods they're worried about and families and all of these things, it just creates a better connection.
Yeah, and that going back to that first experience at LSI Logic, I started writing a series of blog posts about the earliest days of the semiconductor industry and Silicon Valley, because I was at LSI Logic from 1983 to 88. I spent most of my day in cars with salespeople, going to meetings and sitting in meetings, strategizing in meetings about what we were going to present, how we were going to price it. I ultimately owned the price because I was the marketing guy. I just spent so much time with salespeople. In the software industry, that just seemed to be hard to do. Like if I wanted to ride along on sales calls, there's so much writing on these deals. People are like, well, I don't know, I don't want to bring somebody into the meeting who's not closing the sale. It just seems to be harder to do now. And I don't understand why. But your point is spot on. The best way to achieve this sense of unity is to spend a lot of time with salespeople to understand their world and for them to understand yours. And that's just from being in the same room with them.
I think this is where technology may help. I feel like technology was clunky. We haven't really figured it out. And as we figure it out, it's starting to help again. So you mentioned there was a rift, and I feel like there's potential to turn things around. I have to believe that. But technology like Gong and Chorus and all of these call recording devices, I think could be really helpful for marketers who may not be able to sit on the live call, but you can get access to recordings. It's non-disruptive, and it's a super easy way to figure out what language your customers and prospects are speaking. That's something, like, as a copywriter, I struggle with every day. Is I'll use words like attribution and engagement and ROI, and I don't know that my audience is plugged into all of those terms. Is it just jargon to them, or do they understand it? And the only way to know is to listen to how they describe things.
Yeah. Totally. And that's the whole job of marketing, is understanding what are the nouns and verbs that prospects use to describe the problems they've got. There's no substitute for hearing it come right out of the customer. You can't do it with doing Google searches on your own. You really have to talk to the people or hear the people talk.
Yeah. Yeah, and whether you do that through focus groups or listening to recorded calls, you got to do it. So part of the podcast's aim is to enable people to move from like a subject matter expert to somebody who has and is giving strategic value to the rest of the company. And in order to do that, we kind of have to understand, what does the executive team look for? What can I do as an analyst to move from giving you a data dump to providing value? What are the kinds of things you see value in?
That's a good way to frame this, because by the time you get to be running a department or you get into the C-suite, part of the reason you get there is that you can context switch pretty frequently, and context switch from, are we hitting this week, month, quarter, year's plan? But then you're also spending a lot of time thinking about, all the companies I worked at are companies that are growing a lot. So you're thinking about, how soon do we double? Are we going to double this year? Well, if we're going to do that, like, what do I need to be doing now to make it possible for us to double the performance that we've got? So, what's the hiring plan? What's the technology plan? What's the organizational plan? And then how does my plan sync up and support the other executives? So we don't have a lot of time to wade through things. The only metric that I really cared about was conversion performance, because that tells you, and conversion performance all the way from first touch to revenue, that quickly tells you where do you have a problem, and then what the nature of the problem is. When I was at SPS Commerce, we had never done digital marketing, and we started up. It was great. I had some great partners in sales there. I was just on the phone with one, or a Zoom call with one yesterday, and we were talking about this, that he ran our channel business. And from the moment that we said we want to start doing digital demand gen, he was right there, all in. And all we focused on was conversion performance. And it began with conversion performance for search. But then when we got to conversion performance at form submission, a whole new world opened up, because we're a public company. We're doing well over $100 million of revenue a year. We're growing, but our bread and butter sale was like $300 a month. And the sales organization knew how to ladder that up into 7-figure deals over time. But we get these little deals in. Super high conversion rates would tell us, why were we bouncing? And then with this sales partner, we also learned that the time from form submission to first call had a dramatic impact on conversion performance. And we eventually got this thing set up where we would call them within 10 minutes of form submission. We ended up with a 37% conversion rate to revenue on form submissions, because we got so good at chasing down all the bottlenecks. To me, the best thing that the marketing organization and marketing operations could do would be to report in on, what are the critical conversion rates that we're monitoring right now? Because those are going to reveal organizational issues. Those are going to reveal interdepartmental issues. Like, if I hadn't had this partner in sales, we never would have figured out what happens when we call these people within 10 minutes, or if we wait a day. Because if we waited a day, the success rate would fall off an order of magnitude. Conversion performance across the whole selling motion. You don't want to look at every single one, but you do want to get a report saying, what are the conversion points that are in jeopardy, and what are we doing to address them? Because like I was saying, that's going to tell you, you may need to hire different people if you're going to double next year to address that. You may need to have a completely different kind of content. You may need to have a different kind of salesperson. That was kind of where I like to spend my time and attention when I was trying to manage performance of the funnel and the marketing group.
And I'm thinking of all the things that have to take place to get to that point. Your systems have to be calibrated a certain way. You have to have end-to-end data visibility. You have to have the infrastructure in place. I think a big challenge for a lot of marketers is that they spend so much time trying to manually merge all the information together that they're looking back at what happened last quarter and trying to come up with an explanation, rather than saying, okay, this is what's happening now, and here's how it's going to impact what's going forward. Like, here's what I can change to ramp that up even faster. So I really enjoyed working with you, because you understood the importance of setting aside budget to invest in that data infrastructure.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right. You can get bogged down with the rearview mirror, and having agreement on the junctures. Like, conversion rate performance is meaningless if you have a different definition of a stage than your sales partner does. And I've been in some organizations where the sales leader really got offended when we would show up and say, hey, let's sit down and look at these thresholds together and define them together. And they were like, no, 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 that's the salespeople. That's sales domain. We're not going to negotiate these thresholds, or these stages with you, because that's how we run our sales organization. And it just made it really difficult to look at a conversion rate on a form submission, try and measure the time to the first touch of that prospect, and then try and understand what was influencing. Like if a sale progressed from 50% confidence to 70% confidence, if both sales and marketing don't have a shared understanding of what triggers that progression, it makes it really hard for the marketing team to show up with something meaningful to the sales organization to say, here's how I think we can improve that. Yeah, you have to have agreement on all the thresholds, and then you have to automate all of that across two different tech stacks and two different organizations that own those tech stacks. That's really hard to do, but it's critical if you're going to maximize your impact on the business.
This is actually a really great segue into a trend that's been happening in the market. We see a lot of siloed operations organizations, so marketing ops and sales ops combining into revenue ops. What do you think about that specific change? Do you think that's a positive or a negative?
I'm just a super big fan of there's no substitute for great leadership. And to me, that sounds like you are putting a Band-Aid on a leadership problem. If the sales leader and the marketing leader can't agree on how to orchestrate a constructive handoff between marketing operations and sales operations, then the only thing you can do is put them under one person who will force it. And even then, it's going to require leadership, because that one person is going to have to unite two organizations that at that point probably don't like each other, probably don't trust each other. And having them report to the same person is just a Band-Aid, because that same person is going to have to exercise the same leadership that the two individual leaders would have had to exercise to get those two independent organizations to work together. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure it can work well in organizations, but to me, the real issue is if you have a lack of leadership between marketing and sales, you're going to look at combining operations as the solution, and instead it's really a symptom of a leadership problem.
I think that's so fascinating, because as a perspective of somebody, individual contributor or even management within those organizations, I can see the benefits just from the standpoint of coordination between the two teams, because everything marketing does impacts everyone downstream. And I think I've struggled with that in some organizations where that wasn't quite, they didn't grok it completely. Like they didn't completely understand that was a reality. And the two teams just have to be working so closely that to me, it almost makes sense to have it just be merged together. You can't force people to meet together. You can't force people to coordinate unless they're supposed to be part of the same team. So I hear what you're saying about it being a Band-Aid. I see benefits still from a technical and analytics perspective. I feel like if we have a CMO, a VP of sales, and a VP of RevOps, we have the potential to have a less biased team set goals that might align marketing and sales better and might force them to look at revenue instead of MQLs.
I can totally see that. And I can also see there's probably some economic efficiencies too, because you're going to need a developer in each organization. Why not have centralized development? Mm-hmm. So I can totally see how that could be a real source of efficiency. In my last two roles, I spent a ton of time with the sales ops people for that reason, to see what we could do to make things as efficient as possible. Mm-hmm. But I also feel like, I think it's the minority case where somebody says, you know what, we can be a lot better if we combine and align these two functions. And the majority case tends to be marketing ops and sales ops don't get along. Let's just have them report to one person and we can fix that.
I'm actually seeing that at the executive level too. So especially in smaller organizations that don't necessarily have enough capital to afford both a CMO and a VP of sales, they say to the sales VP, you've got marketing now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's hard because sales and marketing are naturally very different disciplines. Like for what we were talking about before, a really, really good marketing organization can do an effective job without being in a room with a salesperson. So much of what you're doing is machine driven across thousands and thousands of discrete engagements. And you can roll up metrics that will tell you how all of that's performing. I used to say to people that people think of marketing people as being sort of the creative, conceptual, the people that draw pictures. And it's the most data-driven, nerdy, quantitative, introvert-focused role you can imagine. And effectively selling requires a totally different skill set and management. What we're talking about earlier, like a sales leader has to make so many judgment calls that don't show up in data. What do you really think that sales reps, like, are they being wishful in their perception of, is that deal really going to close? I think it would be the exception to have a sales leader be able to really manage both of those disciplines unless they came up through marketing and went into sales. I think it'd be really hard. At the same time, I think for small organizations, there are ways to get marketing leadership without hiring a full-time CMO, but you have to have a full-time sales force if you're a small company. Like, you can't not have that. I just got affiliated with a fractional CMO firm out of Minneapolis called Authentic Brand. And their value prop is pretty compelling because they can go to a small company and say, look, you neither should nor can you afford to hire a full-time marketing exec, but you could probably use 10 hours a week and get the impact and the benefit from that. And then a year or two down the road, when you're bigger, then you can think about, well, what kind of full-time person do I need? But you can't not have a full-time head of sales. So I can see why there would be an approach to say, well, we can only afford a head of sales, so we're going to have to do the marketing. But eventually, if the company grows enough, that head of sales is quickly going to be way out of his or her depth to scale the marketing accordingly.
I love what you said about marketing is really a mass communication team. We're not focused on the one-to-one. We can't be. We have very different objectives and methods for getting people to engage with us. And the goal is to eventually move that over to the one-to-one that sales handles. But it's a very different skill set, just like you said.
This is why sales and marketing have to view themselves as one and the same. Because as you come down that journey of thousands of interactions to the one interaction that sales rep is having in the room with that prospect or on the Zoom call with that prospect, it's got to be a one continuum of decision making between the sales leader and the marketing leader for that to really be effective and to get the most out of the business for reasons we've been talking about. And to me, that's the exciting part.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving your perspective on alignment. This has been really great.
I mostly retired about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And when I look back on all the way back to the semiconductor businesses I've helped, it's abundantly clear that the more sales and marketing viewed themselves as partners, the more effective those businesses were. And the more they viewed themselves as adversaries, the more growth stalled, the more turnover skyrocketed. It's unfortunate that there's a whole lot of psychodynamic factors that tend to make sales and marketing look at each other like adversaries. It's only with strong leadership in sales and in marketing that I think you have a hope of getting them to truly be partners. And when they become partners, that's when you get the 37% close rate.
I love that. Is there anywhere people can find you online?
Well, I've got a blog that I started about 12 years ago called Open Ambition. And actually, if you also go to meaningfulfailure.com, it redirects to Open Ambition, because I'm a huge fan in the value of looking at failure as data. And so at that blog, I write a lot about stuff going on in the tech industry, as well as some personal stuff. And then, I recently have become affiliated with a company called Authentic Brand out of Minneapolis. And just a phenomenal CEO over there, Jennifer Zick, has put together a great bench of CMOs who can get engaged with high growth companies, for 10 or 20 hours a week and have long-term engagements and help those companies scale to the point where they can hire a full-time person. So I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah, you can get me at openambition.com and eventually at Authentic Brand.
Great. Well, Peter, thanks so much for being on here. And listeners, check out calibermind.com for more articles and pieces like this. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Camela.